Today, we're talking about something that's been on a lot of people's minds for years: what would happen if Iran and the US went to war? Now, this is a serious topic, and we're not here to sugarcoat things, but we will break it down and look at the key factors that could make or break this kind of conflict. So, let's dive into it. What would a war between Iran and the US look like? Let's look at the background. First, let's talk about the history. The relationship between the US and Iran has always been complicated. It's been full of tension, with a few major turning points. The big one is 1979, the Iranian Revolution, when the Shah was overthrown, and Iran became an Islamic republic. That event cut all diplomatic ties between the US and Iran, and since then, there's been a steady stream of confrontations, with the US accusing Iran of supporting terrorism and Iran calling the US a great Satan. Fast forward to the 2000s, and things only got worse. The US invaded Iraq, Iran's neighbor, which made Tehran very nervous. In 2015, both countries tried to make nice with the nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. But that all went sideways in 2018 when President Trump pulled the US out of the deal, and tensions soared again. What would spark a war? Now, why would these two countries, both powerful, but in very different ways, actually go to war? It's not about a random fight. There are key issues that could push them into conflict. One of the main ones is nuclear weapons. Iran has been working on its nuclear program for years, and the US and its allies are worried that Iran might be looking to build a nuclear bomb. Iran insists its program is for peaceful purposes, but there's always suspicion. Another big issue is the Middle East. The US has a heavy presence in the region, with military bases in places like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Iran, on the other hand, has significant influence over countries like Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. They see each other as rivals for power and influence in the region. Then, there's proxy warfare, a tactic both sides use to fight each other without direct confrontation. Iran supports groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, while the US backs Israel and other regional allies. These proxy battles create constant friction and could easily escalate into a full-blown war if one side feels its interests are threatened. And of course, there's always the risk of a miscalculation. In a high-stakes situation, one wrong move could trigger something much bigger than anyone expected. It only takes one incident, like an attack on a US naval ship in the Persian Gulf or an Iranian military base, for things to spiral. The military impact. If it came to war, the military balance would be tricky. On paper, the US military is far superior in terms of technology, air power, and resources. The US has advanced fighter jets, drones, and an unmatched navy, which would likely dominate in the early stages of a conflict. Iran, though, is no slouch. It has a strong, well-trained military, and its strategic advantage lies in its asymmetric warfare. That means Iran wouldn't fight the US head-to-head. Instead, it would use tactics like guerrilla warfare, cyber attacks, and missile strikes. Iran has a significant arsenal of ballistic missiles, and it has the ability to disrupt oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, a major global shipping route. That could have massive economic consequences, especially for countries relying on Middle Eastern oil. Iran also has powerful militias and proxy groups across the region. These groups could launch attacks against US forces or allies, making it hard for the US to engage in a full-scale war without drawing in multiple countries and factions. Think about Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. If Iran uses these groups effectively, it could keep the US military stretched thin. The economic consequences. The financial fallout from a war between the US and Iran would be massive. We're talking about oil prices skyrocketing, especially if Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, through which around 20% of the world's oil passes. A prolonged conflict could send shockwaves through global markets, pushing up the price of fuel and food and leading to economic instability worldwide. Both Iran and the US are already dealing with economic challenges, and a war would only make things worse. The US has the ability to weather economic hits better than Iran, but for Iran, the situation would be catastrophic. With already existing sanctions and a fragile economy, a war could lead to widespread poverty and even more instability in the region. The human toll. Then, of course, there's the human cost. War always comes with devastation, civilian casualties, refugees, families torn apart, and long-lasting scars on the people involved. For the Iranian people, who have already been suffering from years of economic hardship, a full-scale war would bring even more suffering. For US service members and their families, the risks are equally high. And don't forget the broader region. Countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and even Saudi Arabia could be dragged into the conflict. The impact of such a war would be felt for generations, with millions of lives changed forever. It's not just about bombs and missiles, it's about the people who live through it. Diplomacy as the key. So, is war inevitable? Not at all. While the threat of conflict is real, both sides know the consequences would be too dire to ignore. The US and Iran have both used diplomacy in the past, and despite all the tension, there are still channels of communication between them. Looking forward, it's clear that the relationship between the US and Iran will continue to be volatile. There's a lot of political pressure, both internally in the US and Iran, that could push leaders toward a conflict. But there are also many smart people on both sides working to avoid disaster. The next few years will be crucial in determining whether diplomacy or military action will dominate. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe us Convert site, and if you like this video, like it. Have a good time, my friends.